It wasn't the lack of a kiss that stopped my heart. It was the look in his eyes, the same mask he wore when he fired an executive. But this time, it was aimed at me. It was Christmas Eve. The smell of roasting duck was suffocating. David, my husband, the CEO of Thorn Industries, walked past our glittering tree, bypassed the champagne, and dropped a file on the table. I received an unfortunate report today, Rihanna. Regarding your conduct, he didn't care about the truth. I was 2 days from the biggest promotion of my career, $300,000 raise, total independence. And he knew it. He didn't ask questions. He didn't listen to my defense. He poured himself a scotch and delivered the sentence. Effective immediately, your promotion is suspended. Your salary is suspended. Until you apologize to that junior analyst. Apologize? For a crime I didn't commit? This wasn't a disciplinary action. This was a shaming. A forced submission. A strategic assassination of my entire life, handed down by the man who shared my bed. I looked at him, truly saw the stranger across the room, and understood, he didn't just want an apology. He wanted me broken. Compliant. And if I didn't kneel on Christmas Eve, my CEO husband was ready to destroy me. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But how cold do you have to be to plot the downfall of the man who still sleeps beside you? New York in December. A city that always promised magic, especially on Christmas Eve. The air, crisp and biting, carried the scent of pine and anticipation. For me, Rihanna, it was a scent that had, for years, mingled with the promise of a different kind of magic, the magic of ambition realized, of a future meticulously built. My world, at least on the surface, was a testament to that belief. A high-rise apartment overlooking Central Park, its windows twinkling with festive lights that reflected the city's endless energy. Inside, the quiet hum of a life that most would envy. A life shared with David, my husband, the CEO of Thorn Industries, a titan in the global finance sector. Our life, our empire, was a masterpiece of control and aspiration. I remember that evening with a clarity that still sharpens the edges of every memory. The city was a canvas of white and gold, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights and holiday decorations. David was late. As usual. His work, his empire, always called to him with a siren song more potent than any personal connection. I was accustomed to it, or at least, I had convinced myself I was. The scent of roasting duck filled our apartment, a tradition. I had meticulously prepared it, just as I meticulously prepared every aspect of my life. My promotion to senior vice president had been confirmed earlier that week. A culmination of years of relentless effort, late nights, and sacrifices that often felt invisible. The email, a brief, impersonal confirmation from HR, still sat in my inbox, a tangible proof of my ascent. And with it, a significant salary increase. The kind that whispered of true financial independence. It was supposed to be a celebration. Not just of Christmas, but of us. Of our combined success, our shared future. I had even bought him a vintage watch, a Patek Philippe, something he had admired for months. I imagined his pleased smile, the rare warmth in his eyes. When he finally arrived, the chime of the antique grandfather clock in the hall announcing his presence at precisely 8:30 p.m., the air shifted. It wasn't the usual hurried apology or the quick kiss. He walked in, his expensive cashmere coat still on, his face a mask of something I couldn't quite place, not anger, not sadness, but a cold, distant resolution. It was the face he wore in the boardroom when delivering difficult news. A face I had learned to respect and, at times, fear in a professional capacity. Never, not once, had I seen it directed at me in our home. Rihanna, he said, his voice flat, devoid of any festive cheer. He didn't even wish me a Merry Christmas. He didn't acknowledge the shimmering tree or the carefully laid table. He merely looked at me, his gaze like ice. My heart, which had been beating with the hopeful rhythm of the holidays, began to slow, each beat echoing like a distant drum. Something was terribly wrong. David? Is everything all right? I managed, my voice sounding unnaturally bright in the sudden silence of our living room. He walked past me, towards the bar, and poured himself a neat whiskey. His back was to me, and the tension in the room coiled tighter with each passing second. The aroma of the duck, once inviting, now felt suffocating. I received an unfortunate report today, he began, still not turning. His words were precise, each syllable weighted with an unspoken meaning. Regarding your conduct. My breath caught in my throat. My conduct? I was meticulous, professional, above reproach. Who would dare to? He turned then, finally. His eyes, usually a calm blue, were stormy. It seems you had an altercation with one of our new associates, Miss Lena Petrova, in the West Wing office building yesterday afternoon. Lena Petrova. The name barely registered. I had passed her in the hallway, a new hire maybe. A brief, polite nod. An altercation? It was preposterous. My mind raced, trying to reconstruct every interaction, every fleeting moment. Nothing. There was nothing. An altercation? I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. David, I don't know what you're talking about. I exchanged pleasantries with her. That's all. He took a sip of his whiskey, his gaze unwavering, chilling me to the bone. Miss Petrova's account differs significantly. She claims you were aggressive, dismissive, and made disparaging remarks about her background and qualifications. The accusation was so far-fetched, so utterly baseless, that for a moment, I thought it was some kind of twisted joke. But David's face held no humor, no trace of the man who had once laughed easily with me. This was the CEO, the man who held destinies in his hands. That's a lie, I stated, the indignation rising within me, quickly followed by a cold dread. David, you know me. I would never. He raised a hand, silencing me. A gesture he usually reserved for board meetings when a junior executive dared to interrupt. It doesn't matter what you claim, Rihanna. What matters is the formal complaint that has been filed, with detailed testimonies from several witnesses. Witnesses? My mind reeled. There were no witnesses. The hallway had been empty, or so I remembered. This was a setup. But by whom? And why? Who are these witnesses, David? What testimonies? This is absurd. You can't possibly believe this. His lips, usually so expressive, were a thin, hard line. I believe the facts, Rihanna. And the facts as presented paint a very clear picture of misconduct, especially egregious, given your impending promotion and leadership role. Then came the words that fractured my world, not with a bang, but with a quiet, calculated slice. Effective immediately, your promotion to senior vice president is suspended. Your salary will also be suspended until this matter is resolved to my satisfaction. The roar in my ears was deafening. Suspended? My promotion, my salary? On Christmas Eve? The carefully constructed edifice of my life began to crack, the foundations trembling. It wasn't just the financial aspect. It was the utter disrespect, the callous disregard for everything I had built, everything we had built together. This wasn't David, my husband. This was David, the CEO, wielding his power like a weapon against me. Resolved to your satisfaction? I managed to articulate, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to control it. What exactly does that mean? He set his whiskey glass down with a soft click, the sound amplifying the sudden quiet in the room. It means you will apologize. Formally. To Miss Petrova, and you will ensure such an incident never occurs again. Once that is done, we can discuss the reinstatement of your position and compensation. An apology for something I hadn't done, a public humiliation for a manufactured lie. My stomach churned. This wasn't about an altercation. This was about power. His power. Over me. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw a stranger. The man I had loved, the man I had married, was hidden beneath layers of corporate ice and unyielding resolve. His eyes were cold, distant, devoid of any warmth or understanding. There was no room for discussion, no space for my truth. You truly believe this, David? You believe I, your wife, would behave in such a way, without even hearing my side, without even questioning the validity of these witnesses? He shrugged, a dismissive gesture that cut deeper than any harsh word. The evidence is compelling, Rihanna. My position as CEO demands impartiality. And as your husband, I expect you to uphold the company's values, especially given your prominent role. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. Impartiality? From the man who shared my bed, who knew my character better than anyone. This wasn't impartiality. This was an ambush, the forced apology. Is it a test or something far more sinister? This is just the beginning of my nightmare. If you're feeling the chill of betrayal like I did, hit that subscribe button now. Don't miss a single calculated move in my journey. Or, if you dare to stand by, tell me in the comments why you wouldn't subscribe. What part of this story makes you want to turn away? I'm listening. The Christmas tree lights blurred before my eyes. My mind raced, trying to find a foothold in this suddenly shifting landscape. Apologize? To a phantom accuser, for a phantom crime? It was more than a demand. It was a deliberate act of subjugation. A public shaming. And it was coming from David. My husband. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. The festive evening had shattered, replaced by a cold, sharp reality. My promotion, my salary, my dignity, all held hostage. And the ransom was my submission. I looked at David, standing there, impassive, and a seed of something new began to sprout within me. Not just anger, but a cold, hard resolve. A flicker of something dangerous. This wasn't just about Lena Petrova. This was about power and control. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I would not apologize. Not for this. And if he wanted a battle, then a battle he would get. Only, it wouldn't be a battle fought with shouts and accusations. It would be fought in the shadows, with silence as my weapon, and patience as my shield. My quiet revenge would begin. That night, sleep was a distant memory. The city's lights, once a comforting panorama, felt like the indifferent gaze of a million tiny eyes. I lay beside David, the man who had just dismantled my professional life, and felt a chasm widen between us, colder and deeper than any ocean. He slept soundly, his breathing even, as if the day's events had been nothing more than a routine business decision. I watched him, searching for a flicker of the man I thought I knew, the man who had once promised me the world. I found only a serene, undisturbed profile. Our courtship had been a whirlwind of ambition and allure. I was a driven young analyst, fresh out of business school, hungry for success. He, the charismatic heir apparent to Thorne Industries, already commanding a room with an effortless gravitas. We met at a corporate gala, amidst the clinking of champagne glasses and hushed power negotiations. He had sought me out, drawn by my sharp intellect and uncompromising drive. Or so I had believed. He was captivating. Older, sophisticated, with a mind that moved at a dizzying pace. He spoke of building an empire, of shared aspirations, of a partnership that transcended the personal and professional. He saw my potential, he said, and promised to nurture it, to help me reach the pinnacle. His words were a powerful elixir, fueling my ambition and making me believe in a shared destiny. Our marriage had been celebrated in grand New York style, a society event captured in glossy magazines. The perfect couple, powerful, elegant, unstoppable. We presented a united front, a formidable duo in the corporate world, and a picture of domestic bliss in our carefully curated home. Our life was a well-rehearsed performance, and we both played our parts flawlessly. Or so I had believed. Now, lying there in the pre-dawn quiet, every memory felt tainted, re-examined through a lens of suspicion. Was it always a performance for him? Was I merely a strategic asset, a convenient accessory to his public image? The thought was a chilling prospect, a betrayal that seeped into the very marrow of my bones. The next morning, Christmas Day, was an exercise in stoicism. The apartment still gleamed with festive decorations, but the joy had been leached out of them. David emerged, impeccably dressed, a polite smile on his face. He presented me with a diamond necklace, sparkling under the tree lights. "Merry Christmas, Rihanna," he said, his voice as smooth and polished as the stones. "I hope you like it." I took the box, my fingers numb. The gift, usually a symbol of affection, felt like a bribe, a hollow gesture meant to gloss over the previous night's brutality. "Thank you," I replied, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. I didn't return his smile. I couldn't. He seemed to notice, his brow furrowing slightly. "We need to discuss this, Rihanna," he said, his tone shifting, becoming more authoritative. "This situation with Miss Petrova, it cannot stand. It reflects poorly on us both. Us both. Always. Us both." But it was my reputation, my livelihood, that was on the line. He was merely mitigating a potential PR issue. The realization struck me with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't defending me. He wasn't even attempting to understand my side. He was protecting his empire, his image, and in doing so, he was throwing me under the corporate bus. "David," I began, my voice steady, "I did nothing wrong. And I will not apologize for something I didn't do." He sighed. A sound of weary impatience. Rihanna, be pragmatic. This is a small concession. A simple apology, and we can move past this. Your promotion, your salary, everything will be reinstated. Why are you being so stubborn? Stubborn. He called my refusal to be humiliated, stubborn. It was clear then. He didn't see me as an equal partner, not truly. He saw me as an employee who had stepped out of line, a subordinate who needed to be brought back into compliance. And the fact that I was his wife merely made the situation more inconvenient for him. It's not about being stubborn, David. It's about integrity, it's about the truth. And the truth is, I never had any altercation with Miss Petrova. His eyes narrowed. Then you leave me no choice. Until you apologize, the suspension remains. And I suggest you consider the long-term implications of defying your CEO, Rihanna, both professionally and personally. The thinly veiled threat hung in the air, a poisonous vapor. Personally, was he threatening our marriage? Our future? The foundations of my life trembled again, but this time, a cold fire ignited within me. He had drawn a line, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that I would not cross it. Not for him, not for anyone. The rest of Christmas Day was a blur of forced cheer. We had family over, David's parents, my distant aunt. I moved through the motions, smiling at the right times, offering pleasantries, all while a storm raged within me. Every laugh felt hollow, every kind word a mockery of the truth. I watched David interact with his family, the picture of a devoted son and a successful patriarch, and saw a performance so convincing it chilled me to the bone. How much of him was real? How much was a carefully constructed facade? That evening, after the last guest had left, and the silence of our apartment settled once more, I stood by the window, looking out at the glittering cityscape. The diamond necklace lay cold and forgotten on my dresser. I traced the intricate pattern of frost on the pane, my reflection superimposed over the city's endless lights. I thought of Lena Petrova. Who was she? Why me? Why this elaborate fabrication? It was too precise. Too perfectly timed to be a random incident. Someone had orchestrated this. And the fact that David was so willing to believe it, so eager to wield his power against me, confirmed a chilling truth. He was either complicit or remarkably naive. And knowing David, naivete was not a trait he possessed. The pain of betrayal was a dull ache in my chest, a constant pressure. It wasn't just the professional setback. It was the shattering of a shared dream, the brutal demolition of trust. The man I had vowed to spend my life with had chosen corporate appeasement over my integrity, power over partnership. I looked at my reflection, not seeing the elegant woman in the expensive clothes, but a warrior standing at a crossroads. One path led to submission, to a life of quiet resentment and diminished self-worth. The other, an unknown journey into the shadows, a quest for truth and, ultimately, for justice. My decision, though born of heartbreak, was clear. I would not bend, I would not break. I would not apologize. Instead, I would find out who Lena Petrova was, what her game was and why David was playing along. And when I uncovered the truth, I would not just reclaim what was mine. I would dismantle every lie, every betrayal, brick by calculated brick. My quiet revenge had begun its first, hesitant steps into the cold New York night. The days following Christmas were a blur of enforced normalcy. David maintained his polite distance, always courteous, never warm. The unspoken demand for my apology hung between us like a shroud. I responded in kind, polite, distant, a perfect imitation of a wife navigating a difficult phase. But beneath the surface, a different kind of work had begun. My own investigation. I started subtly, discreetly. My first task was to gather information on Lena Petrova. Thorne Industries was a sprawling organization, but information, even about new hires, was often tightly controlled. However, years of navigating its intricate corridors had taught me where the whispers lived, where the crumbs of data could be found. My initial search of the company's internal directory yielded only a basic profile. Lena Petrova, Junior Analyst, Risk Assessment Department. Start date, November 15th. Education, unknown. Previous experience, undisclosed. It was strikingly bare, almost deliberately so, for someone supposedly important enough to cause such a corporate stir. This lack of detail immediately raised a red flag. Thorne Industries, a company obsessed with due diligence, rarely hired without extensive background checks, especially for positions in sensitive departments like risk assessment. A junior analyst with an almost blank resume. It simply didn't fit. I reached out to Sarah, a friend and former colleague in HR, under the guise of casual office gossip. Heard about a new face in risk assessment. I murmured over coffee, feigning disinterest. Lena Petrova, I think? Any good? Sarah, usually a fount of information, paused. Lena Petrova. I don't recall seeing her file come across my desk. Rihanna. That's odd. All new hires usually pass through me for initial onboarding paperwork. Her words confirmed my suspicion. Lena Petrova's hiring process was irregular, not just sparse, but untraceable through the usual channels. It was as if she had materialized out of thin air, a ghost in the corporate machine, visible only when convenient. This wasn't a disgruntled employee seeking attention. This was a planted agent, but by whom? And for what purpose? My mind went back to David's words, detailed testimonies from several witnesses. Who were these phantom witnesses? And why hadn't I seen any formal documentation, any email, any official memo about this altercation beyond David's personal declaration? As a high-ranking executive, such a complaint, especially one impacting my promotion, should have been officially communicated through HR and legal channels. Nothing, only David's word. The realization was a punch to the gut. David hadn't just believed a fabricated story. He was actively participating in the fabrication. Or, at the very least, he was protecting the fabricator, shielding them from proper scrutiny. The coldness I felt for him deepened, morphing into a calculated anger. I needed to access the company's internal network, something I still had privileges for, even with my suspended status. Specifically, I needed to search for Lena Petrova's digital footprint within Thorn, her email logs, her project assignments, her access history. These were the true breadcrumbs, the digital DNA of an employee. Late one night, when David was away on a supposed business trip, another convenient disappearance, I slipped into my home office. The glow of the monitor illuminated my determined face. My fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing firewalls and security protocols I myself had helped design over the years. This was my domain, a world of data and code I knew intimately. The results were startling. Lena Petrova had an employee ID, an active email address, and network access. But her activity logs were bizarrely sparse. A few emails to a general HR address, some basic internal communication, and nothing substantial. No project work, no collaboration with team members, no extensive data access that a risk assessment analyst would typically have. It was a shell account, a digital phantom. Then I found something. A single encrypted message sent from her internal Thorn email address. The recipient was an external, untraceable account. My heart pounded. This was it. The link to the outside. The thread that could unravel the whole tapestry. Cracking the encryption took hours, pushing my technical skills to their limits. The code was complex, clearly designed by someone highly proficient. But I was more than proficient. I was desperate. And desperation, I discovered, was a powerful motivator. As the final decryption sequence ran, the screen flickered, and the message revealed itself. It wasn't a long message, just a few lines. But the content sent a shiver down my spine, colder than any New York winter. It was a brief update, sent to the external address. Target is compliant. Phase 1 complete. Proceeding as planned. Thorn is secured. Target is compliant. Phase 1 complete. Thorn is secured. The words echoed in my mind, forming a terrifying mosaic. I was the target. My suspension, my humiliation was Phase 1. And Thorn is secured. What did that mean? Secured from what? Or from whom? This was far more sinister than a simple office prank or a jealous colleague. This was a coordinated attack, a strategic maneuver. And David, my husband, was at its epicenter, not merely complicit but an active participant. The anger, which had been simmering, now boiled over into a cold, hard rage. He hadn't just betrayed our marriage. He had betrayed my trust, my career, my very perception of reality. He had used his power, our shared life, as a weapon against me, and the callousness of it, the calculated cruelty, was breathtaking. I needed to understand the full scope of this operation. Who was behind the external email? What was the plan? And why me? What threat did I pose to Thorne or to David that required such an elaborate and cruel scheme? The next morning, I looked at David across the breakfast table, a serene mask of indifference on my face. He smiled, offering a polite good morning. I returned a similar smile, a perfect, practiced curve of the lips. But inside, I was no longer his wife, nor his employee. I was an opponent, a predator, silently observing, planning, waiting for the precise moment to strike. He had underestimated me. He had mistaken my silence for submission, my composure for weakness. But they were merely the calm before the storm. He had just started a war he couldn't possibly win, and I would make sure he regretted every single calculated move. The game had changed. It was no longer about proving my innocence. It was about exposing their guilt. The apology David demanded was merely a test of my compliance, a means to ensure the target was compliant. But the target was no longer compliant. The target was awake. My primary focus shifted from Lena Petrova's identity to her handlers. The external email address, though untraceable by conventional means, wasn't entirely a dead end. Every digital transaction leaves a faint trail, a ghost in the machine. I knew where to look for those ghosts. My network access, though suspended for my general employee profile, still held remnants of my old, higher-level administrative privileges. I had helped build this system, after all. I knew its backdoors, its hidden conduits, its silent observers. I began to dive deeper into the company's data logs, not just focusing on Lena, but on David himself. His communication patterns, his financial transactions, his private calendar entries. I was no longer a wife trusting her husband. I was an investigator, searching for anomalies, for the cracks in his perfectly constructed facade. What I found was a pattern of highly unusual, encrypted communications between David's private company email and a series of offshore accounts. These weren't standard business transactions. The amounts were significant, the frequency sporadic but consistent, and the recipient accounts were untraceable to any known Thorne entity or business partner. This wasn't just about my promotion. This was about something far larger. Money laundering? Insider trading? A hostile takeover? The scale of the deception was beginning to reveal itself, and it was far grander than I had initially imagined. David wasn't just participating in a scheme to discredit me. He was shielding a much larger, darker secret within Thorne Industries. And Lena Petrova was merely a minor diversion, a smokescreen to keep me occupied while the real machinations unfolded. The days passed in a tense, silent dance. David would leave for the office, his briefcases packed with documents I now knew were filled with secrets. I would spend my suspended hours in my home office dissecting data, cross-referencing information and slowly, meticulously, piecing together the true nature of his betrayal. One afternoon, a package arrived, unmarked, addressed only to me. Inside, a burner phone, and a single, cryptic text message: "He knows. Be careful. Thorne is rotten." My heart hammered against my ribs. Someone else knew. Someone on the inside. An ally? Or another enemy, playing a different game? The message was chilling, confirming my deepest fears. David was embroiled in something truly dangerous, and I was now caught in its crosshairs. The sender remained anonymous, but the message itself was a lifeline, a confirmation that I wasn't alone in sensing the rot within Thorne. It also raised the stakes immeasurably. If David knew, what did he know? That I was investigating him? Or something else entirely? I became hypervigilant. Every conversation with David was carefully weighed, every glance scrutinized. I installed hidden cameras in my office, subtle audio recorders in my handbag. I became a ghost in my own home, moving with silent purpose, leaving no trace. The woman who had once valued transparency and honesty was now forced to inhabit a world of shadows and deception. My investigation led me down a rabbit hole of corporate shell companies, offshore investments, and obscure legal entities. The names were complex, the structures deliberately convoluted, designed to obscure the true beneficiaries. But with each layer I peeled back, a clearer, more terrifying picture emerged. Thorne Industries, under David's leadership, was slowly being bled dry. Assets were being systematically siphoned off, profits diverted, and the company's value artificially inflated to mask the losses. It was an elaborate fraud, designed to enrich a select few, leaving the company vulnerable and its shareholders exposed. And David was not just complicit. He was the architect. The realization was a punch to the gut, far more brutal than any personal betrayal. He was dismantling the very empire he pretended to serve, the one he had inherited, the one he had sworn to protect. And my altercation with Lena Petrova? It was clear now. It was a preemptive strike, designed to neutralize me, to strip me of my power and credibility before I could stumble upon his grand deception. He had underestimated me. He had assumed my ambition was purely personal, that my focus on my own career would blind me to his larger machinations. He had underestimated my intelligence, my tenacity, and my unyielding commitment to truth. The quiet hum of the server room in the office building, accessible only to a select few, became my sanctuary. I had found a way to discreetly access archived email backups, not just of David but of his inner circle, the executives who always seemed to agree with him, whose loyalty seemed unwavering. I was looking for patterns, for connections, for shared secrets. What I found was damning. A series of emails dating back almost 2 years, detailing the systematic manipulation of Thorne's stock prices, the creation of shell corporations to hide assets, and the deliberate obfuscation of financial reports. It was a sophisticated, long-term scheme of corporate embezzlement. And David, my husband, was the mastermind. His carefully worded instructions, his precise directives, his cold calculations, they were all laid bare in the digital archives. He hadn't just suspended my salary. He had been systematically looting the company. And when I had gotten too close to a critical promotion, too close to positions that would give me oversight of his illicit activities, he had acted swiftly, brutally. The anger I felt was no longer personal. It was righteous. It was the anger of someone who had seen injustice, corruption, and an audacious abuse of power. I was not merely a wronged wife. I was a witness to a crime of monumental proportions. The burner phone in my pocket vibrated. A new message. Look for Project Chimera. The key. Project Chimera. The name resonated with something I had vaguely heard in passing. A highly classified initiative David had hinted at, shrouded in secrecy, supposedly for future innovation. Now, I knew it was something else entirely. Something far more insidious. My quiet revenge was no longer about personal satisfaction. It was about exposing the rot, saving Thorne, and bringing down the man who had. Project Chimera. The name itself evoked a sense of something artificial, something monstrous, stitched together from disparate parts. I remembered David's dismissive references to it, always vague, always implying a future so complex only he could comprehend it. Now, I understood why. Accessing information on Project Chimera proved to be a formidable challenge. It was walled off, encrypted, even from my administrative access. David had built a digital fortress around it. But fortresses, no matter how impregnable, always have a weak point. A forgotten back door, a flaw in the design. And I knew David's architectural style better than anyone. I spent sleepless nights, fueled by coffee and a burning resolve, dissecting the network architecture, reverse engineering access protocols, and exploiting every vulnerability I knew existed. It was a race against time, a silent battle waged in the cold glow of my computer screen. Finally, after days of relentless effort, a small window opened, a temporary access port, overlooked in an update, a single fleeting vulnerability. I slipped through, a digital phantom in the heart of their secured network. What I found within Project Chimera's files wasn't an innovative tech initiative. It was a comprehensive blueprint for the systematic dismantling of Thorne Industries. It detailed the exact timeline for diverting assets, the specific offshore accounts, the coordinated manipulation of stock prices to artificially inflate the company's value before a planned, catastrophic collapse. The goal wasn't just to enrich David and his conspirators. It was to gut Thorne, leave it an empty shell, and then profit handsomely from its ashes. The scale of the operation was staggering, encompassing years of planning, involving multiple layers of shell corporations and a network of complicit individuals, both within and outside the company. It was a masterpiece of corporate fraud, orchestrated with a chilling precision. And at the very heart of this intricate web, connecting every thread, every illicit transaction, every false report, was David, his signature. His directives, his genius, warped and twisted into a tool of destruction. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, leaving me breathless. It wasn't just betrayal, it was devastation. David wasn't merely a dishonest husband. He was a corporate terrorist, planning to bring down an institution, to destroy the livelihoods of thousands, all for personal gain. The man I had loved, the man I had married, was a monster. I found a secondary file within Project Chimera, labeled Contingency Protocols. This section detailed plans to neutralize any threats to the operation. And there, chillingly, was my name. Rihanna, Senior VP Track. The contingency protocol related to me was labeled Asset Neutralization, Emotional and Professional. It detailed the use of a low-level associate, Petrova, to create a false scandal targeting my integrity and credibility, ensuring my immediate removal from any oversight capacity, and crippling my ability to investigate. My suspension wasn't about disciplinary action. It was the execution of a neutralization strategy. It also contained a timeline. A critical date was fast approaching, January 15th. That was the date scheduled for the final, irreversible action, a massive, fraudulent bond issue that would signal the beginning of Thorne's collapse, lining the conspirators' pockets before the inevitable market shock. I had less than a month. My hands trembled as I read the final document in the file, a personal note from David to one of his key offshore associates. It wasn't about business, it was about sentiment. Rihanna remains the biggest wildcard. She is intelligent, and her integrity is inconvenient. Once the Chimera project is irreversible, we can address the personal separation. She served her purpose. She served her purpose. The words echoed in the silent room, twisting the knife deep into my heart. My marriage, my ambition, my entire life with him, it had all been a lie, a calculated utility, a means to an end. I hadn't been a partner. I had been a pawn, playing a role in his grand, wicked scheme. The heartbreak was sharp, immediate, but quickly curdled into a cold, hard resolve. David hadn't just suspended my salary. He had tried to erase my professional identity and betray my trust. Now, he was going to face the consequences of underestimating the inconvenient integrity of the woman he had discarded. I copied everything. Every file, every communication, every financial detail. I downloaded the entire Project Chimera blueprint onto a secure external drive, an ironclad testament to his crimes. This evidence was my shield, my weapon, and my ticket to survival. I logged out of the system, leaving no trace of my intrusion. I looked at the dark street below our penthouse. The CEO of Thorne Industries had just made the gravest mistake of his professional life. He had turned his most intelligent, most meticulous, and most highly positioned asset into his most lethal enemy. The physical symptoms of betrayal are visceral: the shortness of breath, the metallic taste of adrenaline, the bone-deep ache of lost trust. I was now living a dual life. By day, the suspended executive, quietly occupying our penthouse, the picture of weary submission. By night, the meticulous investigator, the collector of evidence, the architect of his impending ruin. The immediate emotional fallout was the extinguishing of all feeling for David. Grief was replaced by a sterile, intellectual focus. I saw him not as a husband, but as a target, a powerful, dangerous adversary who needed to be neutralized with strategic precision. I needed to secure my exit and prepare my defense. David's contingency protocols had not just mentioned professional neutralization. They had alluded to a personal separation once I was no longer useful. I couldn't afford to wait for his next move. First, finances. My salary was suspended, but I had personal, separate wealth, wisely invested over the years. I consolidated my liquid assets, moving everything into accounts he couldn't touch. I secured a separate, temporary residence, a small, anonymous apartment downtown, paid for in cash, a bolt hole. If the plan went south, I needed an immediate place to disappear. The next step was to deal with the phantom accusation, Lena Petrova. I knew David and his co-conspirators would be watching me, waiting for me to apologize or to lash out. I had to continue the performance. I approached David one evening, setting the stage carefully. I stood by the fireplace, the glow casting long shadows across my face. I wore a look of exhaustion, of defeat. "David," I said, my voice low and weary, "I've thought about this. I still maintain I did nothing wrong, but I can't afford this professional standoff. The company is too important. Our life is too important." He looked up from his iPad, a flash of relief and smug satisfaction crossing his features before he masked it. "Rihanna. Finally. Pragmatism always wins. So, I continued, letting the word hang in the air, laden with false resignation. Tell me what I need to do to issue this apology and get back to work. He smiled, a chillingly patronizing expression. It's simple. A formal, written apology to Miss Petrova, copied to HR and legal. Acknowledging your lapses in professional judgment, I'll handle the rest. Submission was the last thing on my mind. My apology would be a tactical move, a way to re-establish my credentials and, more importantly, gain a critical piece of information: Petrova's precise contact details and her legal standing within Thorne's bureaucracy. I drafted the apology, a masterclass in non-committal corporate speak, acknowledging the perception of conflict without admitting guilt. But the critical move was in the delivery. I insisted on emailing it directly to Lena, bypassing David, ostensibly for speed. He agreed, satisfied that he had broken my will. The email address David provided was not Lena's internal Thorne account. It was a private, encrypted external email. This confirmed my suspicion. Lena was not an ordinary employee. She was a disposable asset, operating outside official channels. I sent the apology. And I waited. The response came quickly, but not from Lena Petrova. It was an automated reply stating the email address was no longer active. This was the opening I needed. I went back to David, feigning frustration. David, the email bounced back. The address you gave me is inactive. I can't apologize if I can't reach her. What should I do? He frowned, genuinely annoyed by the logistical failure. Incompetence, he muttered. Fine. I'll get the details from the legal team. A few hours later he handed me a slip of paper, her personal phone number and home address. She's due back in the city next week. Go to her address directly. Home address. This was gold. The burner phone in my pocket vibrated. The anonymous ally. New message. Petrova is a shell. Follow the money. Her location is the key to the financier. Lena Petrova was the bait. Her location was the thread. The financier was the person pulling David's strings, the ultimate beneficiary of Project Chimera. David was a mastermind, yes, but who was the shadow puppet master? My mind went back to the cryptic offshore accounts and the complex web of shell companies. I needed to meet Lena Petrova. Not to apologize, but to observe, to confirm my theories, and to find the link to the shadowy financier. The clock was ticking towards January 15th. The time for observation was over. The time for calculated action had arrived. The address David gave me for Lena Petrova was a modest, nondescript brownstone in Brooklyn, far from the gleaming towers of the financial district. It was an intentional contrast, clearly selected to portray her as a struggling, sympathetic junior employee, the perfect victim. I drove there late one afternoon, not in my usual luxury sedan, but in an unmarked black car, hired discreetly. I wore plain clothes, blending into the winter crowd. I wasn't Rihanna, the CEO's wife, today. I was a ghost. I didn't knock. Instead, using a pretext about a forgotten package, I spoke to the building superintendent. He confirmed that Miss Petrova rarely occupied the apartment. Quiet girl, he said. Always on the move. Doesn't seem like she works much. The superintendent's casual observation provided a crucial piece of the puzzle. Lena wasn't living there, just using the address as a physical front. My anonymous ally was right. She was a shell. I waited. For 2 hours, I sat in the car, observing. And then, she arrived. Lena Petrova. Younger than I expected, dressed in clothes that were far more expensive than a junior analyst's salary should afford. But it wasn't the clothes that caught my attention. It was the way she moved with a fluid, almost martial efficiency and the cold, practiced paranoia in her eyes as she scanned the street before slipping inside. She wasn't a corporate victim. She was a trained operative. I knew then that a polite apology wouldn't work. I needed a confrontation, engineered to extract information, not to settle a score. I waited an hour after she entered, then approached the brownstone. Instead of knocking, I used the professional-grade lock-picking tools I had acquired years ago during a corporate security exercise, a skill David had found amusing then, but now proved invaluable. I slipped inside. The apartment was impeccably sterile, almost devoid of personal touches, further confirming its status as a safe house or temporary operational base. She was in the living room, on a secured video call, her back to me. I moved silently, positioning myself behind the heavy oak door. I didn't want to interrupt the call, I wanted to hear it. Lena's voice was sharp, professional, stripped of the timid persona she displayed at Thorn. The apology was received. Full compliance confirmed. The target is neutralized and has requested to return to work. David is satisfied. David is satisfied. The irony was palpable. Then, the voice of the person on the other end, low, guttural, distinctly recognizable. A voice I hadn't heard in years, yet one that sent a spike of pure, distilled venom through my veins. Excellent, Lena. The timing is critical. David must remain unaware that we have accelerated the schedule. Ensure no further contact with the target. She is irrelevant now. Focus only on the January 15th issuance. I froze, hidden in the shadows. The speaker was not an anonymous financier. It was a man I knew intimately, a ghost from David's past, a corporate rival whose bitterness had festered for years. Richard Vance. The former executive chairman of Thorn Industries, ousted by David 5 years prior in a brutal corporate coup. Richard Vance. The vengeful rival. David hadn't been the architect of Project Chimera. He had been the muscle, the chief executive executing a devastating plot for the man who hated him most. Vance was using David's greed and arrogance to destroy Thorn from the inside out. But why was David working with his sworn enemy? The answer clicked into place. David was merely the disposable face of the operation. Vance had promised him a king's ransom from the proceeds, enough to disappear wealthy, while Vance orchestrated the collapse and subsequent hostile takeover, reclaiming his former throne. I took a deep breath, stepping into the room. The target is far from irrelevant, Miss Petrova. Lena spun around, her eyes widening in genuine raw terror. She reached instinctively for something hidden beneath the sofa cushion. Rihanna. She gasped, her carefully constructed composure shattered. Lena Petrova was cornered. Her face, moments ago composed and calculating, was now pale, slick with fear. The object she reached for, a small, dark taser, was still tantalizingly out of reach. Don't, I said, my voice level, not a tremor of fear in it. Put the weapon down, Lena. This isn't a fight. It's an information exchange. And I hold all the currency. She hesitated, her eyes darting between me and the door. She was calculating her odds of escape. I knew I couldn't let her leave. If she reported this to Vance or David, my entire strategy would be compromised. You're making a mistake, she whispered, her voice husky. David will deal with you. David is already dealt with, I replied, a cruel smile touching my lips. He's too busy signing documents related to Project Chimera, which, by the way, I now own a complete digital copy of, including your role, Richard Vance's role, and David's personal contingency plan to leave you all holding the bag. The color drained from her face. That was the leverage. Not the evidence of the crime, but the evidence of David's double-cross. Operatives like Lena aren't loyal to causes. They're loyal to self-preservation. He promised me immunity, she stammered. He promised everyone immunity, I scoffed, moving closer, my shadow falling over her. But David doesn't leave loose ends. Contingency Protocol C9, Section 4. Immediate disposal of all non-essential, compromised personnel post-issuance. Guess where you fall, Lena? You're the compromised pawn. She visibly slumped, defeated. She knew the brutal truth of David's methods. What do you want? She asked, no longer defiant but terrified. I want the name of the immediate contact, I demanded. The person connecting David, Richard Vance, and the outside investors funding the Chimera bonds. Vance is the puppet master, but who is the treasurer? The one holding the accounts and controlling the final issuance on January 15th. She hesitated, chewing her lip. I don't know the name, only the pseudonym. In the files, they called him the broker. He never uses a public line, only a secured satellite uplink. The broker. Another layer of anonymity, protecting the most critical point of the operation. This was the final linchpin. If I could expose the broker, the entire operation would collapse, taking Vance and David down with it. And where does the broker operate? I pressed. Lena, seeing her only way out was cooperation, pointed to a small, sealed envelope on a high shelf. Everything I need for the January 15th issuance is in there. Coordinates, encryption keys, satellite schedules. Vance insisted I have it off-site. I snatched the envelope. Before I could look inside, the burner phone in my pocket vibrated frantically. New message from my anonymous ally. They're on to you. Get out. Now. I heard the distinct sound of a heavy key turning in the apartment's main lock. Someone else was entering. I need you to disappear, Lena, I said rapidly. Use whatever means necessary. Get out of New York. Your life depends on it. If you contact David or Vance, I will use my leverage to ensure you take the maximum fall. I didn't wait for her reply. I moved towards the window, silently unlatching the fire escape. I paused, looking back at the terrified Lena, who was scrambling to grab her own pre-packed escape bag. Tell David something for me, I murmured, a cold triumph in my voice. Tell him that I'm not asking for an apology anymore. I'm demanding an extradition. I slipped out onto the fire escape just as the door burst open. I caught a fleeting glimpse of the man entering, a professional security operative, not David. The heat was on. My investigation was no longer a secret. I scaled down the fire escape, blending into the dark alley below. Once safely in my car, speeding away from the brownstone, I ripped open the envelope. Inside, detailed technical specifications, encryption algorithms, satellite dish coordinates pointing to a location far from New York, and a date, January 14th, the day before the bond issuance. The broker was preparing to execute the final steps. My quiet revenge had just become an active counter-operation. I had the evidence, the location, and the timeline. Now, I needed the perfect stage for the final act. The clock was ticking toward January 14th. I had less than 2 weeks to neutralize the broker and expose Project Chimera. The confrontation with Lena had confirmed my most critical suspicion. David was a means to an end for Richard Vance. This gave me an opening. David was arrogant, but Vance was driven by pure, festering hatred. Vance's weakness was his need for public victory. My counter-strategy had to be two-pronged. Cut the operational head of Project Chimera by intercepting the final bond issuance. Use the public stage to reveal David's complicity, ensuring his downfall was absolute and irreversible. The satellite coordinates Lena provided pointed to a remote, high-security data facility in upstate New York, far from any city center. This was the broker's lair. Attacking directly was impossible. I needed an internal asset. I remembered the anonymous burner phone messages. He knows. Be careful. Thorn is rotten. The sender was someone inside Thorn. Someone aware of the corruption. Someone with a moral compass. And crucially, someone with access. I needed to initiate contact. I sent a carefully worded, encrypted text to the burner number. Chimera's date is Jan 15th. The broker is upstate. Help is needed. Who are you? The reply was immediate. Don't ask who. Ask where. Meet me at the Grand Central Clock, 1 a.m., tomorrow, alone. Bring proof. I knew the risk was immense. This could be a trap set by David or Vance, but I had to take it. The scale of the conspiracy demanded an ally. The next night, under the cold, silent gaze of the Grand Central Clock, I waited. Every shadow felt menacing, every person a potential threat. At precisely 1 a.m., a figure approached me. Tall, familiar, yet impossible. It was Mr. Chen, the chief financial officer of Thorn Industries, a man David had always treated with a polite but distant deference. He was the most discreet, meticulous, and loyal man in the entire company. Loyal, I now realized, not to David, but to the institution of Thorn. Mr. Chen's eyes were weary, haunted. You have 5 minutes, Rihanna. I cannot be seen with you. The walls have ears. You know? I asked, cutting straight to the core. I know enough, he replied, his voice a low rumble. I noticed the anomalies in the quarterly reports, the accelerated debt issuance schedule. Project Chimera. I suspected something catastrophic, but I didn't know the extent, or who was behind it, until David suspended you. He paused, shaking his head. He suspended the one person capable of finding the leak. It was a blunder. A catastrophic error in judgment that confirmed my worst fears. He was shielding the truth. I showed him the encrypted drive. This is Project Chimera. The full blueprint. Richard Vance is the architect. David is the executor. They plan to issue $5 billion in fraudulent bonds on January 15th, collapsing the company for personal gain. Mr. Chen's face went white. $5 billion. That's not just a collapse. That's a global financial crisis. We have to stop this. We can't rely on law enforcement alone, I explained quickly. The evidence is too complex, the timeline's too tight. We need to cut the connection on January 14th. The broker, the one handling the satellite uplink, is operating from a secured facility upstate. I know that facility, Mr. Chen said immediately. It's a backup data hub. I have administrative access, digital and physical. They needed my credentials for setup. And David, in his arrogance, never bothered to revoke them fully. This was the asset I needed, the internal access point. The key to the broker's lair. I need you to grant me one-time ghost access to that facility's servers. Remotely, from here, I instructed. Give me a window, just 10 minutes, on January 14th when the broker initiates the final setup sequence. I need to upload a digital kill switch that will void the bond issuance and flag the entire transaction as fraudulent on a global scale. Mr. Chen looked at me, a long, assessing gaze. If this fails, Rihanna, we are both ruined. Worse? We go to prison. If this succeeds, I countered, looking him straight in the eye, we save Thorne, and we bring down the two most corrupt men in New York finance. Which legacy do you prefer, Mr. Chen? He nodded slowly. I will prepare the access. I will give you a 4-hour window, 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. on the 14th. My remote access will be initiated from my secure home line. You must be prepared. And Rihanna, you must be careful. The 10 days leading up to January 14th were a study in extreme tension. I spent my days constructing the digital kill switch, a sophisticated algorithm designed to look like a routine system update but which, upon execution, would rewrite the bond issuance parameters, flagging the transaction as invalid and simultaneously sending encrypted data packets containing the evidence of fraud to global regulatory bodies. I maintained my facade of weary resignation for David. I even inquired about my promotion reinstatement, playing the role of the chastened wife returning to the fold. He was pleased, oblivious, convinced I was back under his thumb. This arrogance was my greatest asset. But one detail nagged at me, the broker's identity. Vance, David, Lena, they were all accounted for. But who was the broker? The CFO, Mr. Chen, was my ally. I needed to know who was operating the final critical uplink. I cross-referenced the technical specifications provided by Lena with Thorne's internal contractor logs. The satellite equipment was highly specialized, installed by a single, obscure technology firm 6 months ago. The firm's name, Onyx Systems. A quick search of Onyx Systems ownership revealed a complex offshore holding structure. I used my skills to pierce the veil of shell companies, tracking the ownership back through layers of obscured financial entities. The trail was deliberately convoluted, designed to hide the true owner. I finally found the shareholder registry, hidden deep within a Panamanian legal database. The ultimate beneficiary, the owner of Onyx Systems, the firm providing the technical infrastructure for Project Chimera, was a woman. Claudia Chen, Mr. Chen's daughter. A young, brilliant computer scientist who had vanished from the public eye years ago after a scandal involving corporate espionage at a rival firm. I felt a cold dread settle over me. My ally, Mr. Chen, was either incredibly loyal to me, or he was playing a far deeper game, potentially shielding his daughter. I immediately accessed Mr. Chen's personal profile within Thorne's HR archives. His daughter, Claudia, was listed as his sole immediate family member. My heart sank. The man who had vowed to help me was inextricably linked to the very person I needed to destroy. I had to confront him. The risk was enormous, but I couldn't deploy the kill switch without knowing whether Mr. Chen was an ally or a calculated double agent. I sent a coded message to his burner phone, Claudia Chen. Onyx Systems. The broker. Meet immediately. He arrived at our rendezvous point, a quiet, deserted park bench, his face etched with genuine panic. How do you know that name? He demanded, his voice trembling. She's the broker, I stated flatly. Your daughter is the one operating the satellite uplink, the one who will issue the fraudulent bonds. Why didn't you tell me? Mr. Chen closed his eyes, his composure shattering. She was blackmailed. Vance caught her years ago, during the espionage scandal. He's been holding it over her. He forced her to build the technical infrastructure for Chimera. David promised him her freedom in exchange for her silence and her technical skill. He promised me he would protect her if I stayed silent about the financial reports. He looked at me, tears welling in his eyes. I couldn't sacrifice my daughter, Rihanna. But I couldn't let them destroy Thorn. I was trapped. I chose the middle path, help you expose them, but keep Claudia's direct role secret until it was too late to hurt her. His sincerity resonated. He was a father desperate to save his child caught between corporate duty and paternal love. But his deception was still a massive risk to my plan. If she is the broker, then she is physically operating the system on the 14th. I stated, the professional overriding the empathetic. My remote kill switch won't work if she has a physical override. She will stop it. No, Mr. Chen whispered. She's not just the broker. She's the target for Vance's final double-cross. David told me a secret. Vance plans to sacrifice Claudia, framing her as the sole architect of the fraud, ensuring all the liability falls on her and David. The stakes were now impossibly high. Not only did I have to stop the $5 billion fraud, but I also had to save Claudia Chen from becoming a scapegoat in Richard Vance's final, lethal maneuver. My revenge against David had expanded to become a rescue operation, ensuring that only the truly guilty paid the price. My plan for January 14th solidified. It required perfect timing, meticulous coordination, and a final, brutal confrontation. The plan. At 10 p.m., Mr. Chen initiates remote access to the Upstate facility's server. I use the access window to physically infiltrate the Upstate facility under the guise of an IT contractor. My goal? Physical access to the broker's console. I confront Claudia Chen, explain the double-cross, and get her cooperation. I need to be sure she won't fight my digital kill switch. At the critical moment of the bond initiation, I physically deploy the kill switch algorithm directly from the console, simultaneously triggering the regulatory alarms. I drove the 3 hours upstate to the remote facility. It was an unassuming building, heavily secured, nestled in a desolate, frozen landscape. I had procured the necessary ID badges and equipment, leveraging my former access to Thorn's security database. I arrived at 9:55 p.m. At 10 p.m., the minute Mr. Chen initiated his remote connection, the exterior sensors briefly flickered, a glitch that lasted exactly 15 seconds. My window. I slipped past the perimeter fence and into the service entrance, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Inside, the facility was a maze of cold, silent servers. I moved quickly, relying on the blueprint I had studied, locating the primary satellite operations center. The operations room was dark, lit only by the eerie green glow of monitor screens. Claudia Chen was there, her young face pale and drawn, her fingers poised over a complex console, running the final checks. The air was thick with tension. I locked the door behind me and stepped into the light. "Claudia," I said, my voice cutting through the electronic silence. She gasped, leaping back, terrified. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" "My name is Rihanna. I'm David Thorne's wife. And I'm here to save your life." I didn't waste time. I placed the technical specifications of Project Chimera on the desk, pointing to the sections detailing her role, and then I pointed to the final section, which Mr. Chen had helped me find, the one detailing the explicit plan to sacrifice her. Transfer of all operational liability to C. Chen immediately following bond issuance. Activate warrant based on prior classified data breach. Claudia's eyes scanned the document, her face contorting as she realized the depth of the betrayal. David, the man who had promised her freedom in exchange for her silence, was selling her to the wolves. "It's a lie," she whispered, her voice cracking. "David promised my father." "David lies to everyone, Claudia," I interrupted, cutting through her denial. "He lied to your father, and he certainly lied to me. He suspended my salary, tried to destroy my career, just to keep me from getting close to this." I pulled out the secure external drive containing my digital kill switch. "We have 20 minutes before the uplink sequence locks. I have an algorithm that will void the bonds and send the evidence to the regulators, exposing Vance and David. Your father is coordinating my access. You are the broker, you have the physical controls. I need you to step away and let me deploy this, or you will take the fall for $5 billion. She looked at the drive, then at the console, then back at me. Her fear was replaced by a slow, burning anger, the anger of a brilliant woman realizing she had been used and tossed aside. "Vance is on a secure line, waiting for confirmation," she stated, her voice regaining its strength. "He's watching the initiation sequence. If I stop now, he'll know." Then don't stop. I countered, moving towards the console. Run the initiation sequence. Give him the false confidence. And at the critical point, when the issuance is transmitted, I deploy the kill switch. It will appear to him as a successful transmission, followed by an immediate, catastrophic, untraceable system failure. He'll never suspect you. She nodded, a single decisive motion. She knew I was her only way out. She stood up, her hand brushing mine. I'll do it. But you have to save my father. David will try to frame him too. I will protect the innocent, I promised. Now, step away. Let's finish this. Claudia moved to the corner of the room, her eyes fixed on the screen. The initiation sequence began. The countdown timer on the main console started ticking down, T-15 minutes. The silence in the operations room was broken only by the rhythmic beep of the countdown timer. I was seated at the console, my fingers flying over the keys, preparing the remote execution of the digital kill switch. Claudia, now my nervous ally, watched from the corner. The main screen showed the live, secure connection to Richard Vance. He appeared as a silhouette, his voice a distorted, crackling command through the speakers. Initiate phase Omega, broker, Vance commanded. Confirm final bond data integrity. Claudia took a deep breath. Confirming final data integrity, Mr. Vance. Parameters are clean. Ready for transmission. T-5 minutes. My code was loaded, disguised as an auxiliary power diagnostic file. Mr. Chen's remote access provided the necessary elevated privileges. T-2 minutes. The system was now locking onto the satellite uplink, preparing for the broadcast to global financial markets. The $5 billion fraudulent bond issue was moments away from irreversible launch. T-30 seconds. My heart hammered against my ribs, a painful drumbeat. This was the point of no return. T-5 seconds. I positioned my finger over the execution key. T-3 seconds. T-1 second. Execution. I hit the key. The screen didn't flash red. It didn't crash. Instead, a tiny, almost imperceptible line of code ran across the bottom of the monitor. A ghost in the machine. For an agonizing second, nothing seemed to happen. The main screen showed the successful transmission of the bond package. I thought I had failed. Then, the dominoes began to fall. A cascade of error messages flashed across the screen, not a system failure but a series of distinct, technical flags. Issuance parameter mismatch, securities validation error, fraudulent source protocol detected. The kill switch hadn't crashed the system. It had made the fraudulent transaction legally and digitally impossible. And simultaneously, it had broadcast the precise reason for the failure. The secure line to Richard Vance erupted in static, followed by a roar of pure, unadulterated rage. Broker. What have you done? Abort. Abort. Claudia and I watched as the primary console screen changed one last time, displaying a new, terrifying message. Transaction flagged. Data package transmitted to Interpol, SEC, and global regulators. Source. Thorn Executive Oversight Protocol. The evidence, my evidence, the entire Project Chimera blueprint was now in the hands of global authorities. The final phase of the operation was complete. I looked at Claudia, whose face was a mixture of shock and profound relief. It's done, I stated, pulling the external drive out and handing it to her. Erase all trace of my presence. Keep this drive safe. Your father is waiting for my signal. Before I could leave, a new face appeared on the secure line. It was David, furious, calling from New York. He must have received the internal alert. Rihanna, he screamed, his face contorted in a mask of panic and betrayal. You did this. I will destroy you. I'll make sure you pay for treason. I stepped in front of the camera, looking at the man I had once loved. My voice was calm, ice cold, every word a calculated hammer blow. The target is no longer compliant, David. And the irony, my dear husband, is that I never apologized. The suspension is over. I just took my promotion to the role of whistleblower. I unplugged the terminal. The room went silent again, save for the hum of the servers. David's last furious face was now merely a dead screen. I left the upstate facility, leaving Claudia to secure the environment and execute the final erasure of my digital footprint. The moment I stepped back onto the frozen New York road, the world around Thorne Industries began to implode. The digital kill switch wasn't just an abort mechanism, it was a detonation device. Global regulators, alerted by the system-wide fraud flags, moved with astonishing speed. By the time I reached the city limits, the news was breaking. CNBC headline: Massive fraud allegations rock Thorne Industries, trading halted. Financial Times: SEC launches full investigation into multi-billion-dollar bond scheme. The domino effect was immediate and catastrophic. Trading in Thorne Industries stock was suspended. Federal agents were swarming the corporate headquarters in Manhattan. David's carefully constructed world was crumbling in real time. I drove straight to Mr. Chen's house. He was watching the news, his face grim, but with a flicker of proud relief. Claudia had already called him, confirming the success of the mission. We had stopped the fraud, and Claudia was safe, already planning her quiet exit from the country with an immunity deal I had secretly negotiated via an anonymous contact prior to the operation. David will be looking for you, Rihanna, Mr. Chen warned. He will know you were the cause. He's desperate. I knew where David would go. Not to his lawyers, not to the authorities. He would go to the one place he felt safest, the place that represented his failure and his ultimate defeat, our penthouse. I had to confront him one last time. Not out of love but out of necessity. I needed to ensure my own safety and retrieve a few critical personal items I had left behind, items he might try to use as leverage. I entered the penthouse an hour later. It was dark, silent, the festive lights of the Christmas tree now seeming like a cruel joke. The luxury, the quiet perfection, was suddenly tainted, the air heavy with desperation. David was in the living room, not impeccably dressed but slumped in his chair, tie loose, a bottle of expensive scotch half empty on the table. He looked ravaged, the cold CEO mask completely dissolved, revealing the broken, terrified man beneath. Rihanna, he slurred, looking up at me, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with a volatile mix of fury and fear. Look what you've done. You destroyed everything. Our life, my company, my future. No, David, I said, my voice calm, walking slowly towards him. You destroyed it. I merely exposed the rot. That company was my inheritance. Richard Vance promised me a clean exit, billions, my freedom. He shouted, lunging at me, but too weak from alcohol and shock to be a real threat. I sidestepped him easily. Vance promised you nothing. He used your greed to get his revenge. You were merely the public face of his destruction. Did you really think he would let you walk away with billions? You were next on the scapegoat list, right after Claudia Chen. The mention of Claudia's name seemed to sober him slightly. He stared at me. How do you know about Claudia? Because, I replied, a cold smile crossing my lips. When you suspended my salary and promotion, you forced me to look for the truth. You underestimated my intelligence, David. You mistook my ambition for blind loyalty. I walked over to the fireplace, retrieving the sealed envelope I had hidden weeks ago, a copy of the key documents I had taken, signed and notarized, detailing David's own internal accounting for the fraud, proving his malicious intent. The difference between you and me, I murmured, holding the envelope up, is that I didn't apologize. I prepared. And I chose integrity over power. He watched me. Realization dawning in his eyes, a flicker of the cold intellect he once possessed. You played me, he said, his voice a broken whisper. You let me think you were beaten. You are terrifying, Rihanna. You taught me to be. David, I countered. You taught me that in this city, in this world, silence and calculation are the only true weapons. As I turned to leave, the doorbell rang, insistent, authoritative. David looked at me, a final, desperate plea in his eyes. He knew who it was. The FBI was here for the CEO of Thorne Industries. Rihanna, he begged, please. I can save you. Tell them I forced you, that I manipulated you. We can survive this. Survival is solitary, David, I said, opening the door to the waiting agents. And I already survived you. The spectacle of David Thorne, CEO, being led away in handcuffs from his own luxurious penthouse, was the quietest, most satisfying victory of my life. He was escorted past the towering Christmas tree, a bitter symbol of the night his betrayal began. The chaos continued for days. Thorne Industries was placed under temporary regulatory receivership. Richard Vance, the puppet master, was already on the run. But his arrogance, his need for control, proved to be his downfall. Vance, believing he had outmaneuvered everyone, had planned his final act of vengeance. He hadn't just used David to destroy Thorne. He had a contingency to destroy David's reputation forever, even if the fraud failed. David had secretly provided Vance with documents detailing his own manipulation of Thorne's finances over the years, before Vance's coup proof of his own crimes meant to be used for blackmail. Vance planned to leak this to the press, ensuring David's complete ruin. But Vance was unaware of one thing: my own early discovery of that evidence, thanks to my initial access into David's files. Before the authorities could track him down, I ensured Vance's leak was preempted. I sent an anonymous, highly encrypted package to a reputable investigative journalist I trusted, one who valued truth over sensationalism. The package contained both the evidence of Vance's grand conspiracy and David's earlier, secret history of corporate sabotage. The journalist's report broke the next day. The masked bonds, David Thorne and Richard Vance, two corporate titans, united in greed. The report painted a complete picture: Vance's long-term plan, David's willing execution, and the systematic looting of the company. The public revelation was the climactic shift I had sought. It wasn't just about arrest, it was about reputation. Both men, once revered figures in finance, were now publicly synonymous with the largest attempted corporate fraud in history. Vance was apprehended a week later, attempting to cross the border, identified only by the very passport he thought was secured by his stolen wealth. My final twist of the knife, however, was for myself. The authorities, thanks to Mr. Chen's testimony and my ironclad evidence, recognized me not as an accomplice, but as the whistleblower who saved the company. The SEC, in a rare move, officially commended my courage and extraordinary integrity. The very altercation David had used to suspend me was now viewed through a lens of corporate defense. Lena Petrova, now protected by an immunity deal that kept her safe, confirmed the setup. My reputation was not just restored, it was elevated. My divorce was handled swiftly, quietly, and entirely on my terms. David, consumed by his legal battles, signed everything without a fight, including a clause that ensured my continued financial independence and the transfer of all my shares in Thorne shares he had once dismissed as minor. I walked out of the lawyer's office a free woman, no longer Mrs. David Thorne, no longer an employee but an executive with an untarnished reputation, substantial assets, and the profound, quiet victory of having outplayed the men who thought they could break me. The aftermath of the Thorne scandal was a period of intense public scrutiny, but for me, it was a time of quiet power building. I retreated to my temporary downtown apartment, maintaining a low profile, letting the press devour the wreckage of David and Vance's lives. Thorne Industries was now a company in crisis, but a solvent one, thanks to the swift intervention and the voided bonds. A temporary board was established, comprised primarily of long-standing, ethical shareholders. And they needed leadership, someone with institutional knowledge, an untainted reputation, and, most importantly, the trust of the regulators. I received a call from Mr. Chen, who had also been exonerated and was now serving as the interim financial advisor to the new board. "Rihanna," he said, his voice respectful, "the board needs a permanent CEO, someone to rebuild the institution, someone with integrity. They want you." The offer was the ultimate, poetic irony. The man who had suspended me, stripped me of my promotion, and betrayed my trust had, through his own arrogance, inadvertently created the perfect candidate to take his job. I didn't hesitate. "I accept," I told Mr. Chen. "But on my terms." My terms were non-negotiable: a complete structural overhaul of corporate governance, immediate termination of all executives complicit in Project Chimera, and total authority to rebuild the company based on transparency and ethical dealing. The board, desperate to restore confidence, agreed to every condition. I walked into the Thorne Industries headquarters 3 weeks later. Not as David's wife, not as a senior VP track candidate, but as the new, permanent chief executive officer. I sat in David's old office, the one with the panoramic view of the city. It felt different now. No longer a stage for his ego, but a command center for my vision. The perfect life he had tried to share with me was built on lies. The life I would build now would be forged in truth. My first order of business was to call Lena Petrova, who was safely out of the country. I ensured that her immunity deal and relocation funds were secure. I was ruthless in my revenge against David and Vance, but I would not punish the pawns who were blackmailed into compliance. My second call was to my legal team. I established the Thorn Integrity Fund, a foundation dedicated to providing financial and legal support for whistleblowers within the finance industry. A silent acknowledgement of the treacherous path I had walked. I looked at the corporate portrait of David Thorn that still hung in the main hall. I ordered it taken down. Not with a public ceremony but quietly, discreetly, replaced by a piece of abstract art that symbolized the company's new, forward-looking ethos. The message was subtle, yet clear. The old regime was erased. The quiet power I wielded now was far more potent than the public, blustering authority David had commanded. My power was built on evidence, strategy, and unassailable ethical high ground. I had not just reclaimed my career. I had reclaimed my name, my reputation, and my agency. The city outside my window looked different now. No longer a reflection of David's power, but a testament to my own quiet, formidable strength. I was finally where I was meant to be, at the pinnacle of my ambition, earned not through marriage, but through resilience and calculated revenge. Months passed. The scandal faded into the annals of corporate history. Thorn Industries, under my leadership, began its steady, ethical climb back to prominence. I found a quiet satisfaction in the mundane complexity of turning a corrupted institution into a model of integrity. The true moral of the story, I realized, was not the downfall of the men who betrayed me but the discovery of my own resilience. David's demand for an apology had been a test of submission. My refusal was the first step towards liberation. He had shown me that integrity was not just a virtue, but a weapon of last resort. I rarely thought of David or Vance. They were where they belonged, facing the consequences of their spectacular greed. Their lives, once defined by power and luxury, were now reduced to the confines of legal proceedings and public shame. My empowerment wasn't loud or explosive. It was quiet. It was in the calculated silence of my planning, the meticulous collection of data, the ability to wait, observe, and strike when the timing was perfect. I didn't engage in shouts. I engaged in strategy. I didn't seek sympathy. I sought justice. I sold the penthouse. The memories, the cold, suffocating silence of that Christmas Eve, were too potent. I bought a beautiful, sunlit brownstone, far removed from the corporate heights, a space that was entirely my own, free of shared history and compromise. The last time I saw David was in court, during a preliminary hearing. He was pale, thinner, his expensive suits replaced by standard legal attire. He caught my eye across the courtroom. There was no anger left, only a profound, exhausted regret. He looked at me, the CEO, the woman who had brought down his world, and I saw a flicker of the man who had once admired my ambition. I offered him nothing. No nod, no smile, no gesture of recognition. He was merely an entry in the court docket, a footnote in the story of Thorn Industries' rebirth. My silence, that powerful, measured stillness, was my final, ultimate revenge. The moral, then, is simple. Do not mistake a woman's composure for complicity. Do not mistake her patience for weakness. When facing betrayal, the coldest, most calculated revenge is not about destruction but about reclaiming agency. It is about building a foundation of truth so strong that the lies of your enemies crumble into dust at your feet. My salary was reinstated, and then multiplied tenfold. My promotion was superseded by the corner office. The mask of the CEO's wife was off, replaced by the quiet, unyielding power of the one who saved the entire empire. And the only apology I ever gave was to myself for ever believing a mask was the face of the man I married. If my story of quiet revenge and total reclamation resonated with the warrior inside you, don't let this journey end here. Hit that like button, and if you truly understand the power of silent victory, you must subscribe now. If you don't subscribe, enter the comments below and explain why you're choosing to walk away from this power. I need to know why the truth still scares you. Let the silence speak.